It can be described as a welcome relief. In Davos 2018, oil prices hovered just below $70 a barrel, a far cry from $28 hit during the World Economic Forum in 2016. A much better environment for the two major oil producers, Saudi Arabia and Russia, who worked out a deal to reduce the output of OPEC and non-OPEC countries. But there is a downside to the price recovery. It will welcome more U.S. shale production and challenge those two major producers. I sat down with the ministers from those countries and more during the CNN Money Energy Roundtable here in Davos. Shale and U.S. production, Mr. Secretary, could be the spoiler in 2018. Can we believe the estimates of going from 9.8 million barrels a day up to, say, 10.3 or 10.5 million barrels a day? That seems like it could be a spoiler.
I don't particularly think that it is going to be a spoiler, the American shale production, and partly, as we were speaking earlier, that there's a lot of reforms going on in the world, certainly in the kingdom with what the Crown Prince is doing there. You think about Mexico and the reforms that are happening, Minister Pradhan, and what's happening in India. And I think that those reforms have the potential to really drive consumption, to drive innovation. So, you know, I'm a big believer that the best days are in front of us.
This is from the IEA looking at U.S. production going back to 2009 and all the way up to 2021. To be fair and clear, these are all U.S. products. So we're not just talking about oil here. So over 7 million barrels a day to perhaps 14 by 2021, and that's all products here. Minister Al-Faleh, that's pretty substantial. Does that keep the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia just a little bit worried about what we see in the market today?
So for the U.S. to regain and even to exceed some of its market share in a much bigger market doesn't necessarily present a threat to other producers. I think you also have to look at this in the context of what is happening elsewhere. If you look at the Americas, from Canada all the way to Brazil in the south, with Mexico decline, Venezuela decline, you will find out between 2014 and 2017, despite all of the talk and about shale and this revolution and the tectonic shift it's creating and game changer, the Americas production is actually flat. So I am thinking that in the next 25 years or so, we're going to see another 20 million barrels of demand. We're going to hit 120. I remember here, probably in this room, where one of my colleagues back then said we're going to peak at 95 million barrels of demand. And here we are talking about 100. So I don't think we should worry. Obviously, the oil market is very sensitive to inventories. We saw that 2 years ago. And if we don't keep our eyes on the inventory, we could go out of balance. But in the long term, it's a very healthy market, and I think we can accommodate the kind of numbers that are coming out of the U.S., even if they are as bullish as that chart shows. And if everybody is on plan, which is a good thing, I think we just need to be careful about managing our production. I think leaving it free for all and just pushing production to the max, we tried it for a couple of years, and everybody felt the pain. Certainly all of the producers felt the pain, but in 2015, even consumers, because of the secondary impact on demand for industrial goods, on the global economic indicators like deflation, like low interest rates, even consuming countries were complaining about the state of the oil industry and calling on us to do something that is good for producers and consumers.
I interviewed you right after the close of the meeting in Vienna on November 30th, and you said if this price starts to creep up, we may have to rethink what we've signed on to for all of 2018. We're almost at $70 a barrel for North Sea Brent. Do you think it's time to revisit and be a little bit more cautious and not leave a huge vacuum for the U.S. shale and traditional producers to take your market share?
We should not be afraid of shale oil production in general in the general energy mix and in the general supply and demand on the market. As my friend Khalid said, we have 100 million barrels a day. This is the market demand as it stands today. And shale oil is 5.7 million barrels of shale oil per day, which is 6%. Even if they add 6 more million barrels by 2021, as you showed it on the slide, well, this will add 2-3% to the overall demand. So you should understand that this is merely one way of satisfying the market. There may be many different ways of producing oil. There can be shale oil, traditional oil production, deep water shelf, Arctic shelf. There's so many different ways. We should also bear in mind that every year, to sustain the existing level, even for that, we need to restore our production at 4 to 5% from the existing level. And this is a huge investment that the market demands. And the deal that we've reached between the OPEC and non-OPEC producers that was concluded under the leadership of the minister from Saudi Arabia, and we had other non-OPEC nations on board. So this deal shows that the countries, in order to achieve their goals and in order to balance the market, they are ready not only to overcome economic difficulties, but also political difficulties. Naturally, every deal will run its course and will end at some point, and we'll have to go back to a market situation. So we also believe that depending on the balance between supply and demand, that the key would be fair competition when it comes to production, when it comes to downstream, both in the oil and in the gas sector, and in any sort of activity. And so we are in favor of avoiding protectionism. We are in favor of fair competition, whereby the consumers and the producers will have a win-win situation where the producers could meet the growing demand and provide enough supply.
How long does the demand for traditional oil and gas remain strong? You're almost importing 5 million barrels a day, because we often talk about this energy transition. Prime Minister Modi talked about the investments into renewables. Is this going to continue rising at this pace for the next 5 years?
For the next 25 years, the incremental requirement, 25% of incremental requirement will come from India. Our growth, our per capita energy consumption is very low. We are a growing country, we are a developing country, we are a young nation. I'm a strong believer my requirement is bound to grow, and sizable of that growth will meet out by conventional sector, and I will continue to depend on this import. And being a consuming country, I was listening to the different argument, the balancing. You use the term disruption. I will use the term the balancing. Whether it is shale oil, whether it is our reliable friend from Kingdom. My expectation as a consumer will be the price should not pinch our domestic economy. We must appreciate more capex on exploration and production area. So the producing country also look into the interest of consuming country. This balance must be the finer point, the main point of the production balancing.
What do your forecasts show us, Dan, in terms of demand holding up? We're at nearly 100 million barrels a day. We often talk about this onset of peak demand, and I see a huge range of expectations. We know where Minister Al-Faleh stands.
You know,
where's your head today in early 2018?
You know, I find it very ironic. On the one hand, this discussion about peak demand, which is sort of shifted into discussion about transition. On the other hand, we're seeing about as strong demand as we've ever seen in oil. And you kind of say last year, we added 90 million new cars. About 99% of them were gasoline-powered cars. So in terms of when there's a peak or a plateau, at least based upon what we see today, it's not tomorrow, it's not next week, it's not next decade. Maybe it's around 2035, 2040, and it's going to be at a higher level than we are today.
You were digging through your notes, Minister Al-Faleh. What are your thoughts about the year? Can you protect 50 as the floor for 2018 or not?
You know, actually, we didn't target 70. We didn't target 60. We, as Minister Novak said, we have a fixed target, which is to bring balance into the market. Inventories is the main indicator of that balance, as well as supply and demand being essentially in line, and we're not there yet. Price is an outcome and not an input. Price will be the outcome of reaching that balanced market, and the market will balance around a price that brings enough investment flows, enough to meet the incremental demand that we've been talking about today, as well as to offset the decline.
But you have buy-in, as you were suggesting at the end of the OPEC meeting, for all of 2018, or you're going to have people in June of your membership going, look, this price is too high, we should go back to the drawing board and ease back a little bit?
I think people may fear that the price will trigger slowing demand and a flood of supply from the source we've been talking about, which is shale.